Imagine a young woman who hides her nationality to survive. She becomes the queen of the greatest empire in the ancient world. And then she learns that in 70 days, her entire people will be destroyed. Every man, every woman, every child, and only she can stop it. But to do so, she must break a law punishable by death. This is the story of Esther, a story of how God uses the most unexpected people in the most incredible circumstances, a story of courage, faith, and God's providence. What happened in the Persian palace 2,500 years ago showed how God protects his people, even when it seems he is silent. The 5th century before our era. The Persian Empire stretches from India to Ethiopia, encompassing 127 provinces. It is the most powerful state on earth. In the capital city of Susa, King Ahasuerus rules, also called Xerxes. His palace is stunning in its luxury, but behind the marble walls unfolds a drama that will forever change the fate of an entire nation. King Ahasuerus holds a grand feast that lasts 180 days. Imagine this magnificence. 6 months of continuous celebration. Gold glitters in the sun, wine flows like a river, power and might are on display. After this, there follows another feast for 7 days for all the residents of Susa, from the noblest nobleman to the simple craftsman. Golden and silver couches, curtains of white linen and purple, golden vessels, each different from the other. And the king commands that no one be forced to drink. Each person acts according to their own will. At the same time, Queen Vashti holds a feast for the women in the royal house. On the 7th day of the feast, when the king's heart is merry with wine, he commands 7 eunuchs to bring Queen Vashti in her royal crown. He wants to show the peoples and princes her beauty because she was beautiful in appearance. But Queen Vashti refuses to come. This was an unheard of act, a public humiliation of the king before all the princes and the people. The Bible does not explain why she refused, but it can be assumed that she considered it improper to appear before a crowd of drunken men. The king becomes furious. Such an insult could not go unpunished. Ahasuerus consults with wise men who know the law. One of the princes, Memucan, makes a speech that will decide the queen's fate. He says that Vashti's action will become known to all the women of the kingdom, and they will begin to despise their husbands. He proposes issuing a decree that Vashti no longer come before the king, and that the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. The verdict is pronounced. Vashti is stripped of her royal crown and disappears from history. After this, when the king's anger subsided, servants suggest that he gather all the beautiful young women from all the provinces of the empire. Let the king choose a new queen. And an incredible story begins. In the city of Susa lives a Jew named Mordecai from the tribe of Benjamin. His ancestors were deported from Jerusalem many years ago. Mordecai had an adopted daughter, Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle. The girl's parents died when she was still a child, and Mordecai took her in, raising her as his own daughter. Esther was beautiful in form and lovely in appearance. When the royal decree about the search for a new queen was announced, many young women were gathered in Susa. Esther was also taken to the royal house. But before sending her to the palace, Mordecai strictly instructed Esther not to tell about her people and her kindred. Why such secrecy? The Jews lived in dispersion among other peoples, and their position was vulnerable. Mordecai understood that in a foreign land, caution is not cowardice, but prudence. The young woman pleased Haggai, the keeper of the women, at first sight. This was not just outward beauty. There was something special in Esther. some inner grace that disposed people toward her. Haggai hastened to give her the best cosmetics and everything necessary, assigned her 7 best servants, and placed her in the best part of the women's house. Every day, Mordecai came to the courtyard of the women's house to learn about Esther's welfare. He could not go inside, but waited at the gates, anxious about the fate of his adopted daughter. The preparation process was long. When the turn of each young woman came to go to the king, she was entitled to 12 months of preparation. A whole year. 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and other cosmetics for women. After this, the young woman would go to the king. In the evening, she would go in, and in the morning, she would return to the other women's house. She would not go to the king a second time, unless the king desired her and called her by name. Most of these girls spent the rest of their lives in oblivion. A year of preparation passed. Esther's turn came, and here she showed amazing wisdom. When other girls demanded expensive jewelry and exquisite clothes, Esther did not ask for anything except what Haggai advised. She trusted the counsel of a man who knew the king's tastes, and Esther won favor in the eyes of all who looked upon her. There was something more in her than beauty. Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in the 10th month, in the 7th year of his reign, and what no one expected happened. The king loved Esther more than all the women. He placed the royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. A simple Jewish girl, an orphan, stands before the throne of the greatest king on earth, and he chooses her, not just as one of the concubines, but as queen. The king held a great feast for all his princes, a feast for Esther. The entire empire celebrated the new queen. But Esther did not forget Mordecai's instruction. She did not tell about her kindred and her people, even having become queen. She continued to obey her adoptive father. This was her strength. In those days, when Mordecai sat at the king's gate, an event occurred that seemed insignificant. 2 of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, became angry at the king and plotted to lay hands on him. The matter became known to Mordecai, and he immediately told Queen Esther, and Esther told the king. The case was investigated and found to be true. Both conspirators were hanged, and the incident was recorded in the royal chronicles. Mordecai received no reward, no recognition. But God sees all, and he was already preparing this event for the future. After this, King Ahasuerus exalted Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite. He elevated him and set him above all the princes. Haman became the second man in the empire. All the king's servants bowed down and paid homage to Haman because the king had so commanded. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Day after day, everyone saw this. Why did Mordecai not bow? The Bible gives an important clue. Haman was an Agagite, that is, a descendant of Agag, king of the Amalekites. Here, an ancient enmity is revealed. The Amalekites were long-standing enemies of Israel. Even in the time of the Exodus from Egypt, they attacked God's people without cause. For this, God commanded that the memory of Amalek be blotted out. Mordecai, as a descendant of the tribe of Benjamin, remembered this history. To bow to a descendant of Agag meant for him a renunciation of the faith of his fathers. It was a question of faithfulness to God. The king's servants spoke to Mordecai day after day, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" But he did not listen to them. Then they told Haman that Mordecai was a Jew. When Haman saw with his own eyes that Mordecai did not bow, Haman was filled with rage. But he decided that it seemed beneath him to lay hands only on Mordecai. A terrible plan was born in his heart. Haman sought to destroy all the Jews throughout the whole kingdom, all Mordecai's people. Think about this madness. One man did not bow, and Haman decided to destroy an entire nation. Millions of people were to die because of one man's wounded pride. This is demonic hatred that knows no bounds. Haman resorted to pagan divination. They cast pur, that is, the lot, from day to day and from month to month, until the lot fell on the 13th day of the 12th month, almost a whole year ahead to prepare for genocide. Haman came to the king, and his speech was masterfully composed, full of lies. There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws. It is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the king's treasury. 10,000 talents is a colossal sum. Haman planned to take this from the property of the murdered Jews. The king took his signet ring and gave it to Haman. The king said, in an indifferent tone, "The silver is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you." The Persian king did not even ask what people this was. He did not conduct an investigation. He simply gave his ring. Haman received complete power over the life and death of an entire people. Indifference proved no less deadly than hatred. On the 13th day of the first month, the king's scribes were summoned. Everything was written just as Haman commanded. Letters were sent to all the king's provinces to kill, destroy, and annihilate all Jews, young and old, children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, and to plunder their goods. A death sentence for an entire nation, from nursing infants to elderly people. According to the laws of the Medes and Persians, a decree sealed with the king's ring could never be revoked. Even the king himself had no power to revoke such a decree. The couriers went out hastily. The decree was issued in Susa, and the king and Haman sat down to drink. What a terrible contrast. The king and Haman feast, raised their glasses, while the city of Susa was in confusion. Even non-Jews were shocked by this unprovoked cruelty. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, his grief was inconsolable. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, covered his head with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. This was the cry of an entire people condemned to destruction. In every province where the king's command reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, and weeping, and wailing. Imagine this picture. Throughout the vast empire, from India to Ethiopia, in 127 provinces, Jews wept, understanding that in 11 months they would be no more. Esther's servants came and told her about what was happening outside the palace gates. The queen was deeply distressed. She sent clothes to Mordecai, thinking to ease his grief. But he did not accept them. Esther did not know the reason for his mourning. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the eunuchs, and sent him to Mordecai to find out what had happened. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square, and there Mordecai told him everything. He gave Hathach a copy of the decree to show Esther, and he conveyed a request that Esther go to the king and plead with him for mercy. Hathach returned and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Esther now knew the truth. Her people were sentenced to death. Every Jew in the empire would be killed in 11 months, and she was their only hope. But she faced a harsh reality. Esther sent word through Hathach. Everyone knows that anyone who goes to the king in the inner court without being summoned has one law: death. Only the one to whom the king extends his golden scepter will live. And I have not been summoned to the king for 30 days. Here is the tragedy of the situation. Esther is queen, but she cannot simply go to the king. Violation of protocol was punishable by death. The king could pardon by extending the golden scepter, but he might not pardon. Moreover, she had not been summoned for a month. Perhaps the king had cooled toward her. Perhaps her time had passed. Mordecai replied with words that changed everything. "Do not think that you will escape in the king's house any more than all the other Jews. If you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" This is the most powerful moment in the entire book. Mordecai tells her three things. First, your position as queen will not save you. You are a Jewess, and the decree concerns you. Second, if you do not help, God will still save his people another way. God is faithful to his promises. Third, perhaps it is for this very moment that God has raised you to the throne. Esther made her decision. She commanded a reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, neither day nor night. I with my servants will also fast. And then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Here is true courage. Esther decided to risk her life for her people. 3 days and 3 nights pass in agonizing anticipation. Esther fasts and prays. Throughout all of Susa, the Jews fast with her, crying out to God for a miracle. Imagine these hours. Fear, uncertainty. Every minute brings closer the moment when she will have to go. Esther knows she might die. But she knows something else too. Silence is equivalent to death for her entire people. On the 3rd day, Esther dressed in royal attire, putting on her finest clothes, and went. She stood in the inner court of the king's house, in the place where the king could see her. The king sat on his royal throne. Esther stood there, and her heart beat like a hammer. This could be the last moment of her life. One look from the king would decide everything: the scepter or death. When the king saw Queen Esther, a miracle happened. She won favor in his eyes. God touched the king's heart. The king extended to Esther the golden scepter, a sign of mercy. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. She was alive. The king said to her kindly, "What is it, Queen Esther? And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be given to you." But Esther does not hurry. "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared." A strange answer. She has the opportunity to ask for anything. The king is favorable, but she asks only for a feast. She needed to create the right moment. God was guiding her words. The king immediately agreed. The king and Haman came to the feast. The atmosphere was pleasant, wine flowed, conversation ran easily. During the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish? It shall be granted to you. What is your request?" And again, Esther does not reveal her main request. "If it please the king, then let the king and Haman come to a feast that I will prepare for them tomorrow. And tomorrow I will do as the king has said." Another feast, another delay. Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart, at the pinnacle of happiness. The king honored him with his presence at the queen's personal feast. Twice, he alone. But when Haman saw Mordecai at the gate, and he did not rise or tremble before him, Haman was filled with rage. All his joy evaporated. But Haman restrained himself, not wanting to spoil his mood. Coming home, Haman sent for his friends and his wife, Zeresh. He needed listeners. He told them about his great wealth and about his many sons. He had 10 sons. He told how the king had promoted him. Haman continued with pride. "Even Queen Esther invited no one but me. and tomorrow I am invited by her together with the king. Only me. Twice. But then his face darkened. Yet all this is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Here is pride in its pure form. Haman had everything: power, wealth, honor. But one man who refused to bow poisoned all his happiness. His wife Zeresh and his friends gave advice full of malice. Let a gallows be made 50 cubits high. In the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. This pleased Haman. 50 cubits is about 75 feet. A huge gallows that would be visible from all ends of the city. Haman wanted not just to kill Mordecai, but to make his execution a public spectacle. The gallows was prepared. Tomorrow morning Mordecai would be dead. But that very night, something amazing happened. That night, sleep fled from the king. He tossed on his bed but could not sleep. The hand of God. The king ordered the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, to be brought. They were read before the king, and it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthan and Teresh, who had plotted to lay hands on the king. The king remembered and asked, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" The servants answered, "Nothing has been done for him. A man saved the king's life, and he received no reward." What a coincidence of circumstances. That very night, when Haman is preparing the gallows for Mordecai, the king cannot sleep. He orders the Chronicles to be read. And they read precisely that part that speaks of Mordecai's deed. For those who believe in God, there are no coincidences here. This is his providence. The king thought about how to reward Mordecai. The king asked, "Who is in the court?" And Haman had just arrived early in the morning, eager and full of evil plans, to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged. The servant said, "Behold, Haman is standing in the court." The king said, "Let him come in." Haman entered, and the king addressed him. What should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? Haman immediately thought with self-assured pride, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" Of course, the king is talking about me. And Haman began to describe the ceremony of which he himself secretly dreamed. For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought. Let a horse be brought on which the king rides, with a royal crown on its head. Let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them dress the man and lead him on the horse through the city square, and proclaim, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." The king nodded. "Quickly, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing." Imagine Haman's face at this moment. Horror, shock, incredulity. The man he hated most, for whom he had built a huge gallows, whom he planned to execute, this man must now be publicly honored. And he, Haman, must personally conduct the ceremony honoring his enemy. Haman took the robes and the horse, found Mordecai, dressed him, led him to the city square. And there, before the crowds, Haman led the horse and proclaimed in a loud voice, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Every word burned him. The whole city saw this humiliation. Mordecai returned to the king's gate. But Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered, a sign of grief. His triumph had turned to shame in one night. Haman told his wife Zeresh and his friends everything that had happened. His wise men and Zeresh said to him words full of dark foreboding. "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. Even pagan wise men recognized that there was something special about this people. While they were still speaking, the eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. The king and Haman came to feast with Queen Esther. Haman was dejected after the morning's events, but had to hide his feelings. The king was in good spirits. The king said to Esther during the wine feast, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. What is your request?" Now the moment of truth had come. Esther knew she could delay no longer, now or never. Queen Esther answered, and her voice trembled. "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request." The king froze. Her life. "What is the threat?" Esther continued. "For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, I would have been silent. For our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king." She revealed her secret. She is a Jewess, and she is sentenced to death in a few months. King Ahasuerus, shocked, asked Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he, who has dared to do this? Who dared to sentence the queen to death?" Esther turned and pointed to Haman. "A foe and enemy, this wicked Haman." Silence. Haman trembled before the king and queen, understanding that his end was near. The king rose from the feast in anger and went into the palace garden to cool down. Haman understood that his fate was sealed. He remained to beg Queen Esther for his life, for he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. He fell at her feet, begged, wept. This proud man who wanted to exterminate an entire people now humbled himself before a Jewish woman. When the king returned, he saw a scene that finally sealed Haman's fate. Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. The king interpreted this in the worst light. Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house? As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face with a cloth, which was a sign of death sentence. Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said before the king, "Moreover, the gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, who spoke good for the king, stands at Haman's house, 50 cubits high." The king did not hesitate. Hang him on that. And they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. The irony of God's justice is perfect. Haman hanged on the very gallows he built for Mordecai. He who digs a pit for another will fall into it himself. And the king's anger abated. On that day the king gave the house of Haman to Queen Esther. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther told the king what he was to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. The enemy of the Jews was dead. Justice had triumphed. But the main problem remained. The decree to exterminate the Jews was still in effect. According to the laws of the Medes and Persians, it could not be revoked. Esther again came before the king. She fell at his feet, weeping and pleading with him to avert the evil of Haman and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. Haman was dead, but his evil decree was alive. The king extended the golden scepter to Esther. Esther rose and stood before the king. She spoke with desperation. "If it please the king, and if I have found favor before him, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, which he wrote to destroy the Jews. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" King Ahasuerus explained the harsh reality. "Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he intended to lay hands on the Jews." But then he offered a solution. "Write as you please concerning the Jews, in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. Here is the way out. The first decree cannot be revoked, but a second can be issued, giving the Jews the right to defend themselves. The king's scribes were summoned in the 3rd month. 2 months had passed since the first decree. 9 months remained until the day of extermination. Everything was written as Mordecai commanded, to the Jews, to the satraps and governors from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces. It was written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring. Letters were sent by couriers on swift horses. The king allowed the Jews in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force that might attack them, on one day, the 13th day of the 12th month. The same day that had been appointed for the extermination of the Jews now became the day when they received the right to defend their lives. The decree was proclaimed in all the provinces. The couriers went out quickly. The decree was issued in Susa. Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. The city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. For the Jews there was light and gladness and joy and honor after weeks of weeping. In every province there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews, accepting their faith, for fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. They saw the hand of God. 9 months of waiting passed. In the 12th month, on its 13th day, the day that everyone feared arrived. On the day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain power over them, the reverse occurred. The Jews themselves gained power over those who hated them. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the king's provinces to lay hands on those who sought their harm. No one could stand against them, for the fear of them had fallen on all peoples. All the officials in the provinces supported the Jews. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, but they laid no hands on the plunder. This is a critically important detail, repeated 3 times. The Jews did not take spoil. They did not seize the property of the slain. They defended their lives, but did not act from greed. They killed 75,000 of their enemies throughout the empire, but they laid no hands on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews. In the letter, he established a new feast, that they should celebrate annually the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the same, as the days on which the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month that had been turned for them from sorrow into gladness and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days for sending gifts to one another and gifts to the poor. Thus was established the Feast of Purim, named after the word Pur, which means lot, which Haman had cast. The day that should have been a day of destruction, God turned into a day of salvation. The Jews accepted the establishment of the feast. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers. He sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his people. This story shows how God acts in history, protecting his people. Think about the spiritual lessons. God acts even when it seems he is silent. In the book of Esther, his presence is felt in every turn of events. He arranged for a Jewish girl to become queen exactly when it was necessary. He arranged for the king to be unable to sleep that very night and to order that very part of the Chronicles to be read. He granted Esther favor in the king's eyes. Coincidences? No. God's providence. God uses ordinary people for his great plans. Esther was a simple orphan girl. She was not a prophetess. But at the critical moment, she found the courage to stand up for her people, risking everything. Mordecai was an ordinary official. But his faithfulness to God and wise counsel played a key role in saving the nation. Pride leads to downfall. Haman had everything: power, wealth, honor. But his pride did not allow him to enjoy it. He could not accept that one person would not bow to him. This pride led him to attempt genocide. And in the end, he died on the very gallows he had prepared for his enemy. God's justice is perfect. God uses even evil intentions to fulfill his plans. Haman wanted to destroy the Jews, but his actions led to Mordecai being elevated, the Jews receiving the right to defend themselves, and the enemies being defeated. What was intended for evil, God turned to good. Sometimes we must risk for the sake of truth. Esther knew that going to the king without being summoned was almost certain death. But she said, "If I perish, I perish." There are moments when silence is equivalent to betrayal. There are moments when we must rise up and act, even if it frightens us. God is faithful to his promises. He promised Abraham that he would make his descendants a great nation. He promised that through Abraham's line would come the Messiah. If the Jews had been destroyed in Persia, these promises would have been empty. But God protects his people and his word. Even when it seems that all is lost, God's promises are unshakable. The story of Esther shows the importance of the unity of God's people. When Esther was preparing to go to the king, she asked all the Jews of Susa to fast with her. The entire nation supported her with prayer. And when the time came to defend themselves, the Jews gathered together in every city. Their strength was in unity. This story teaches us to see God's hand in the circumstances of our lives. Mordecai told Esther, "Who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Each of us is where we are, not by accident. God prepares us and places us in specific locations for specific purposes. Do not miss your moment. Jews celebrate Purim to this day, 2,500 years later. Every year they read the book of Esther, hold feasts, give gifts, and make donations to the poor. This is a living reminder that God cares for his people. The story of Esther is real events recorded in God's word. This is living testimony about God, who governs history and protects those who belong to him. The queen whom God used to save his people reminds us of a simple truth. In God's hands, each of us can become an instrument of his will and a participant in his plan of salvation. God is not looking for perfect people. He is looking for willing hearts. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoy living and inspiring biblical stories, subscribe to Living Bible Stories channel so you don't miss new videos. We'd appreciate your like and comment. It really helps the channel grow.